T-minus 90 seconds and counting. All systems are good. We're about 90 seconds from the launch of SBSH Discovery. Space exploration has always fascinated us, but it's not all adventure and discovery out there. Far from Earth, astronauts have faced moments of terror and have left behind terrifying last words. That music even sounds a bit spacey, didn't it? You hear that? That whistling sound. Yeah, it sounds like, you know, outer space music. Some stories are chilling, some heartbreaking, and others are complete mysteries. Here are the top 10 most terrifying things astronauts have ever said in space, words that remind us just how cruel space can be. What were these last words, spoken in their most desperate moments? The mysterious knocking. Imagine floating out there in the vastness of space, and suddenly, you hear knocking. That's exactly what happened to Yang Liwei, the first Chinese astronaut to orbit Earth in 2003. Alone, thousands of miles from any sign of life on Earth, he suddenly heard a terrifying banging from outside his spacecraft. Liwei described it as if someone or something was hitting a metal bucket with a hammer. Now, that's enough to make even the bravest among us a little nervous. What's even stranger? The knocking didn't stop. It continued for several minutes, coming and going unpredictably. Liwei wasn't the only astronaut to hear these sounds, others have reported similar experiences. The source? No one knows. Some say it could be the sound of the spacecraft expanding and contracting due to temperature changes. Others aren't so sure. Could there be more to it? Naturally, space agencies took note of these strange occurrences, but to this day, no clear explanation has ever emerged. The sounds happened randomly, always catching astronauts off guard. Liwei himself admitted that despite all his training, he couldn't find a logical explanation. He even tried to recreate the noise back on Earth but couldn't match it. Was it a hallucination? A glitch? Or could it be something else? Roaming out there in the cold depths of space. After hearing this, we have some serious questions. Is space as empty as we think? And if not, what, or who, might be out there? Could these strange noises be connected to other odd events that astronauts have experienced in the blackness of the cosmos? SOS messages. Imagine sitting by an old radio when suddenly, faint, desperate voices crackle through. These voices shouldn't be there, pleading for help. This eerie moment happened to two Italian brothers, Achille and Giovanni Battista Giudica Cordiglia, in the late 1950s. The brothers were radio enthusiasts who had converted an abandoned German bunker into their listening station. There, they claimed to intercept strange, chilling messages from space, voices that were more than simple broadcasts. One of the most haunting transmissions they intercepted came from a female cosmonaut in 1961. Her voice was full of panic as she cried, "Conditions are getting worse. Why don't you answer? We are going slower. The world will never know about us." Her voice seemed to convey the terror of someone knowing their end was near, filled with frustration and despair. The brothers could only listen helplessly as her voice faded into silence. A mystery that still haunts those who hear it. Here's the twist: the Soviet government never officially acknowledged these failed missions. Back then, secrecy was paramount, especially during the Cold War. Any space disaster was often swept under the rug. This secrecy left room for rampant rumors. Skeptics have questioned whether the Giudica Cordiglia brothers truly intercepted these distress calls, or if it was all a hoax. Yet to this day, the recordings exist, and many believe they're genuine, a window into the terrifying final moments of early space explorers. These recordings leave us with some haunting questions. What really happened to those lost cosmonauts? And if these messages are real, how many more distress calls from space are waiting to be discovered? Vladimir Komarov's final words. Vladimir Komarov was brave, but even the most courageous can feel fear, especially when they're plummeting back to Earth in a doomed spacecraft. In 1967, Komarov boarded Soyuz 1, a Soviet spacecraft that was meant to be a milestone for the Soviet space program. But from the start, the mission suffered technical issues, and Komarov knew Soyuz 1 wasn't ready. He reportedly told his friends that the spacecraft had severe flaws, but under immense pressure, he proceeded with the mission. Deep down, he knew it could be his last. As he began his descent, things went from bad to worse. The parachutes, designed to slow the capsule's fall, failed to open. Imagine his horror as the Earth grew larger by the second, knowing there was no way to stop it. Komarov's final words, picked up by American space stations, were filled with rage and heartbreak. He screamed, "The heat in my capsule is rising. You've killed me." Those who heard his last transmission felt his sense of betrayal, not just by the Soviet system but by the people who had pushed him into a mission he had doubted. The Soviet government remained silent about Komarov's tragic end. Officially, they hailed him as a hero, but never publicly acknowledged the mission's flaws. His death was a grim reminder of the extreme dangers and sacrifices faced by early space explorers. Komarov knew the risks, but he felt compelled to do his duty, which is what makes his story so haunting. How many other secrets are being kept hidden by space agencies? And what about the other astronauts who faced terrifying moments alone? Michael Collins, the forgotten astronaut. Michael Collins is often called the forgotten astronaut of Apollo 11. While Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin became legends for taking the first steps on the moon, Collins had a different, less glamorous role. He stayed behind in the command module, orbiting the moon alone, while his crew members made history. Imagine that, floating in space, completely isolated, with only the silence of the void and the glow of Earth in the distance. At one point during the mission, Collins found himself entirely out of contact with Earth, no radio, no chatter from mission control, just utter silence. Later, Collins described the experience as both peaceful and terrifying, a rare kind of loneliness that few can comprehend. For a brief moment, he was the most isolated human being in the universe. It was in this moment of isolation that Collins thought, "I hope we make it back." Those simple words were incredibly haunting, capturing the intensity of that moment. Imagine the desperate fear of wondering if something would go wrong with the landing or return journey, and that if it did, he would be left alone to orbit the moon forever, waiting for a rescue that might never come. Thankfully, Armstrong and Aldrin returned, and Collins safely brought them back to Earth. But the isolation and the fear of being stranded remain unforgettable parts of his journey. What was it like to feel completely alone in such a vast and mysterious place? What if those who hear strange sounds coming from their spacecraft don't have the luxury of silence but something more sinister? Fire in the cabin. Apollo 1 was meant to be a routine test mission. Astronauts Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger B. Chaffee were strapped in, running through the pre-launch checklist. It was January 27, 1967, and everything seemed to be going according to plan. But then, without warning, an electric spark ignited the pure oxygen inside the cabin. Within seconds, the capsule was engulfed in flames. The astronauts had barely any time to react. All they could do was shout a desperate warning. Gus Grissom's voice emerged through the radio, "Fire in the cabin." Trapped in the blazing inferno, they were unable to escape. The heat and toxic smoke made it impossible to breathe. The equipment that was supposed to protect them only turned against them. To make matters worse, the cabin door opened inward, a design flaw that made it nearly impossible for the crew to exit quickly, even if they had managed to survive the flames. In the end, the crew perished, and the tragedy forced NASA to re-examine spacecraft safety standards. Apollo 1 became a tragic reminder that space exploration isn't just about reaching new frontiers, it's about facing unimaginable dangers, often in ways we can't anticipate. The tragedy paved the way for future missions, but the memory of the fire still looms large, reminding us of the risks